Hey everyone, and welcome to the History Reader. In today's video we're doing the second installment of my series of videos on Stalin Waiting for Hitler 1929 to 1941 by Stephen Kotkin. This is the second volume of his biography. I do have videos on the first volume and also the first part of this book. As I explained in the first video, this is a very long book. It's very in depth, it's very detailed, so I'm splitting it up into three parts, just as the book is split up. So the first part dealt the collectivization and dekulakization and the decisions that were made around that, why Stalin made those decisions and how they played out. I go over all of that in the first video, so I'm not going to repeat it here. The second part is about the terror, and it probably is it's a really crucial part of Stalin's domestic policy. It's really the last major piece of domestic policy that really defines Stalin. After this, we're really getting into foreign policy and the war, so that will dominate the rest of the book. This middle section of the book is where Kotkin's style, his very distinctive style of writing, comes to the fore. It's also where I start to really struggle with it. Kotkin writes in a very scatterbrained kind of way, and I haven't read anything else by Kotkin, so I don't want to place this just on his writing style. I think it's probably a decision he's made because of the way Stalin thinks, or the way he's trying to portray Stalin as thinking, as being really scatterbrained. There's a lot going on. Stalin's in the middle of, as Kotkin is setting up here, Stalin's in the middle of what he deems the imperialist power. He's got Germany and France and Britain on one side, he's got Japan on the other side. He's in the middle of all of this. He feels like, because he's a Marxist-Leninist, there's this class struggle, that class that he'd already suppressed, the bourgeois class, the kulaks, they are going to try to overthrow him and his regime. And he's paranoid about it. Certainly there are actual plots that maybe exist in some small form. There's Trotsky overseas. And so Stalin does have all of this stuff going on. And that's the way Kotkin writes the book. He writes in these kind of short, I want to say like subheadings. Basically, it's a very heavy book. But you can see there's these subheadings. And they run for sort of a few pages, often like one page, just over one page. The longest is about 2 or 3 pages, and they'll sort of, there's common threads which are jumping from one thing to another, and I find it quite challenging to follow everything, but I think that it's probably a good representation of Stalin and his thinking, so I don't want to push you away from reading the book because of that. It is just quite challenging. Now, the threads that he's building here is number one, Spain. So the Spanish Civil War kicks off and the USSR lends assistance in the fight against Franco. But Kotkin makes the argument that actually, while he is making a stand against fascism, I do it in quotes because Franco maybe or maybe not fits into fascism depending on your opinions and definitions. But he's also worried about Trotsky taking power in Spain. And again, this is part of his paranoia. Was Trotsky ever really going to take power in Spain? I don't have the expertise to make that to make a decision on that. But the arguments Kotkin seems to be making is that Stalin feared that this was going to be the case, and so he doesn't fully commit to that. To the assistance of the fight against Franco, but he certainly uses it as fuel at home for the purges, and that is really the crux of this middle section of the book. Stalin got party, he got the army, he got the NKVD, he just guts everything. There are millions of arrests. People go to the gulags, they're executed, there's all the show trials. And it's the defining feature of Stalinism. And it doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't make any sense why he would do this unless you get into Stalin's head and you see this paranoia. He thinks he's going to be overthrown either by someone within the Soviet Union working against him or by the capitalist power. And he denounces people as spies. And the detail is crazy. He actually edits the testimonies that these people give, their confessions. He writes them and edits them, circulates them to the Politburo, and then sends them to be signed. We have Tukhachevsky, Marshal Tukhachevsky, the effective head of the Red Army, we have his confession, which Stalin had edited, and then Tukhachevsky was forced to sign, and it's got his blood all over it. He was obviously beaten and tortured and forced to sign this thing. And it's really, really crazy. Kotkin makes the argument that he does this largely to cement his power, and that makes sense. Implicates a lot of his inner circle as a way of gaining power over them. They close ranks around him to protect themselves. And there's this kind of interesting, I don't know if Kotkin directly talks about it this way in the book, I can't remember, but it kind of works like a virus. One person gets, like he says these quotes of number of arrests that have to happen in the various regions, which is obviously stupid. If this was actually looking for a plot that he thought was happening, the mandate would be to find the plotters, not just to make 1,000 arrests. But the way they do this is they arrest one person, get that person to confess and say, oh, well, who else was involved here? And so all that person's contacts basically become implicated, and they can then make a decision whether to arrest them or not because of that connection. And you can imagine how quickly this then implicates practically everybody. And of course, Stalin's inner circle then gets implicated. They've worked for this person or worked with that person who has been executed. We see several examples of this where people assume that they're going to get sent to a gulag or be executed, and they don't, and it makes them have to stick close to Stalin. But it really is fascinating the way he guts everything. He goes and he splinters the Red Army. He takes away like half of the officers. It's really fascinating. And then the part ends really with Hitler on the ascendant and Stalin realizing that he's made a big error in gutting everything. He is not ready to fight Hitler, and he turns off the purges like that. And that's where this part ends. Next part is about what the subtitle is, Waiting for Hitler. How this war is going to start. Is Hitler going to invade the Soviet Union? How can Stalin stop it? What is Stalin's strategy? That's going to be part 3, but part 2 was about how Stalin, in his paranoia, in his absolute obsession with his ideology, puts himself on the back foot. And that's really what Kotkin is trying to say here. So obviously I've not scratched the surface here. Part 2 was like 300 or 400 pages. Read the book. It is really excellent. It's a big read, but it's well worth getting that insight. So thank you for watching. I'll be back soon with part 3. I'm working through it, and I'll put that video up as soon as I can. Hope you're having a great week, and I'll see you next time.